Here is a list of things I have started and not finished. A novel, 2 online courses, a sourdough starter, a self-imposed philosophy reading curriculum, a YouTube channel about architecture, one about astronomy, learning Portuguese, learning the piano, and a podcast I recorded 3 episodes of before deciding the concept wasn't quite right. If this sounds familiar, if reading that list produced either recognition or a mild sense of comfort, then we need to talk. Because the story most people tell about this pattern is a story of failure, of discipline problems, of scattered attention and an inability to commit, of someone who has potential but can never quite harness it. That story is wrong, and today I want to replace it with something more accurate, and ultimately, more useful. Let's start with a question that sounds almost too simple. Why do you lose interest? The common answer is boredom. But boredom is not an explanation. It's a label. The real question is, boredom. With what, exactly? Margaret Lobenstein, in her work on what she calls Renaissance souls, makes a distinction that I think is the most useful reframe I've encountered on this topic. She argues that for certain types of people, the primary drive is not mastery, it's discovery. And once discovery transitions into maintenance, once the learning curve flattens and the work becomes consolidation rather than exploration, the psychological reward system disengages. You weren't born lazy. You were born with a brain that finds the acquisition phase of learning genuinely thrilling and the maintenance phase genuinely painful. Now consider what most conventional success models ask you to do. Find one thing, master it completely, and then do it for decades. Build an identity around it. Monetize it. Repeat. For approximately 80% of the population, this model works reasonably well. For the rest of us, it is a kind of slow suffocation. This is not philosophy. There is neuroscience. Here, studies of dopamine and novelty seeking, particularly research on the DRD4 gene variant associated with curiosity and exploration, suggest that some brains are significantly more sensitive to the reward of new information than to the reward of accumulated expertise. Your dopamine system is literally calibrated differently. You're not failing the model. The model was never designed for your brain. Leonardo da Vinci left an estimated 2/3 of his commissioned work unfinished. Let that sit for a moment. The person widely considered the greatest polymath in human history, painter, sculptor, architect, musician, mathematician, engineer, inventor, anatomist, botanist, the man whose notebooks contain ideas that would not be technologically realized for 400 years after his death, left most of what he started incomplete. His contemporaries criticized him for it. His patrons were frustrated by him. And yet, we spend 500 years studying his unfinished sketches. Aristotle wrote extensively across biology, physics, metaphysics, ethics, politics, rhetoric, and poetics, but many of his works appear to be incomplete lecture notes rather than finished manuscripts. Leibniz, one of the inventors of calculus, left behind an extraordinary volume of unpublished work spanning mathematics, philosophy, linguistics, and theology. None of it organized, much of it abandoned mid-thought. What these figures share is not a failure of follow-through. It's an insatiable appetite for the frontier. Every time the frontier moved, they moved with it, leaving the settled territory behind for those who preferred to cultivate rather than explore. The tragedy of the modern polymath is not that they start too many things. It's that they live in an era that has no cultural framework for celebrating breadth. We have Nobel Prizes for specialization. We have no prize for seeing the whole. Here is the cycle that most polymaths recognize. Phase 1. The spark. Something catches your attention. A subject, a skill, a discipline, a question. It feels electric. You can't consume enough. You buy the books, watch the lectures, find the best people in the field and devour their thinking. You're alive in a way that feels almost suspicious. Phase 2. The plateau. You've learned enough to understand the shape of the field. The initial mystery has partially resolved. You can do the thing, not perfectly, but competently. And something shifts. The electricity diminishes. You start looking sideways at other subjects, Phase 3, the abandonment. You move on, and immediately the internal prosecutor appears. Why can't you just commit? Why do you always do this? What is wrong with you? Here is what that prosecutor gets wrong. Phase 2 is not failure. Phase 2 is completion. For a certain kind of mind, you extracted what you came for. The discovery phase yielded its reward. Moving on is not abandonment. It's the natural conclusion of your particular learning cycle. The problem only emerges when we apply an external standard, the specialist standard, the finish what you start standard, to a brain that was never built for that standard. Emily Wapnick, who coined the term multi-potentialite, argues that multi-passionate people bring something to every field they touch that specialists cannot. Combinatorial thinking, the ability to apply the logic of one domain to the problems of another. The willingness to ask questions that feel naive to insiders, but that sometimes crack open problems that have been stuck for years. The greatest breakthroughs in any field rarely come from the deepest specialists. They come from people who wandered in from somewhere else and noticed something the locals had stopped seeing. So what do you actually do with this? The first shift is semantic. Stop using the word unfinished. Start using the word completed to purpose. You learned what you came to learn. You moved when the learning moved. That is a process, a legitimate, functional process, not a failure to maintain discipline. The second shift is architectural. Rather than fighting your nature, design around it. Build what Cal Newport might reluctantly call a portfolio of interests, and what I prefer to think of as a constellation. Multiple points of light, each real and bright, connected by a larger invisible geometry that only you can see. The key insight is this: you don't need to finish everything to produce something. The polymaths output is not a completed checklist. It's the quality of thinking that happens at the intersections. The novelist who also studied physics, the therapist who also played jazz, the software engineer who read Proust. What they make in their primary domain is shaped, invisibly, irreversibly, by everything they touched along the way. Practically, this might look like keeping an active project at any time. Not a completed one, an active one. Giving yourself permission to have a dormant shelf where things rest without being abandoned. Learning to distinguish between the end of the discovery phase and genuine disengagement. And most importantly, documenting as you go. Your half-explored notebooks are not evidence of failure. They are a record of the kind of mind you have. Here is what I want you to carry out of this video. Somewhere inside the architecture of your mind, there is a vast, complex, improbable network of ideas, half-built projects, abandoned skills, and genuinely interesting questions. To someone on the outside, and perhaps to the inner critic who has absorbed the specialist standard, this looks like chaos, waste, evidence of a person who couldn't commit. But chaos is not the right word for a library. And that's what you have. An unusual, idiosyncratic, deeply personal library. And the library is not the problem. The library is the point. The Portuguese have a word, saudade, for a deep emotional state of nostalgic longing for something you love that you know is incomplete or distant. I sometimes think polymaths carry a version of this toward their own abandoned projects, a tenderness for the things they started. That tenderness is not guilt. It's love. It means the projects mattered. And, in a polymath's life, things that mattered never fully disappear. They reconfigure. They become part of the lens through which you see everything else. So the next time someone asks you why you never finish anything, and they will, you can tell them, I finish exactly what needs finishing. The rest I carry. Next video, we reframe overstimulation, not as a symptom to manage, but as a message to understand. Take care of yourself, genuinely,